Welcome to God Answers Prayer. I'm Linda Tiano. I'm here with you to hear a new story about how God is answering prayer in our lives and in the lives of so many other people. Let's go to Colossians chapter 3, verses 23 to 24. Put your heart and soul into every activity you do as though you are doing it for the Lord Himself and not merely for others. For we know that we will receive a reward, an inheritance from the Lord as we serve Yahweh, the Anointed One. Christine Turpen-Patton is sharing today how Yahweh answers prayer even when our lives are shattered. You don't want to miss this. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back. I'm here with Christine Turpen-Patton. It's good to have you with us today. It's so good to hear your story. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because did you grow up here?
I did.
Okay.
So I wasn't born here, but my dad was military, so brought us here. So I've been here since I was in first grade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned that you came from a shattered childhood. Share a little bit about that with us.
Okay. So my dad was abusive to my mom. And, the one thing that I say my mom gave to us was our faith. It was me and my sister. My sister's 3 years younger than I am. And I remember praying every night that they would get a divorce. And so my mom ends up cheating on my dad, and they end up getting a divorce. So, but I just, it was, the greatest gift she gave me was my faith. And, I'd pray every night, and I just knew God was going to answer my prayers. And so when they got divorced, my mom did remarry, but both of my parents are alcoholics. And so my mom was not only, she was physically abusive and verbally abusive, and, the life with my stepfather was just, again, he, they would get in a fight. He would leave. She would burn his clothes.
Oh my goodness.
At one time, caught the entire apartment on fire.
Wow.
So we ended up having to move. So, yeah, it was, But again, I really attribute it to knowing that it was like, I feel like Job. I always had faith, and I always knew that there was going to be a better chapter. And so, anyway, so then. They, at about 16, my mom just told me to go live with my dad just because she wanted to be mean. She was very good at being mean. And he lived in Florida at the time. And I didn't want to go live with him. He was remarried. He was, again, abusive. And both of them, my mom and my dad were both alcoholics. So, the Lord, I think, just gave me the guts to ask my dad if I could have my child support and live on my own. And so at 16, I lived on my own. So I had a job, and I had my, the child support, and I lived in a studio apartment. I wasn't even old enough to get my own lease. I had
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah. How did you do that?
So the guy I was dating had a friend who was 18.
Oh.
So he signed the lease for me, and school was always my out, because at school I could have a normal life, and I could be, somebody that different, and not have to think about what I was coming home to.
Yes.
So I always excelled at school. I loved it. It was my haven. So I always, had really good grades and all that. And so I was living on my own. I was thriving, and again, just to be mean, my mom called the school and said I was a runaway, and, they needed to put me in the D home. So I remember the police officer at school calls me in and says, you know what, you have stellar grades, you're obviously thriving, and, we're not going to go anywhere with this.
Oh, good.
Yeah, exactly.
Favor of the Lord.
Yes. So again, I really do feel like I know, how Job felt, because I always just knew I was going to have a better chapter. I went to school with a lot of kids whose parents were in the PTA and, doctors and lawyers, and I knew I didn't have their life, but I always knew that I was going to have a good life.
Yeah.
So,
So how did your sister fare through this?
Yeah, so my sister ended up going to live with a friend of hers, and it was a single mom and her kids, and then I ended up living with some friends of mine and their family, and then my mom passed away when I was 17, and at that point, my sister was living with the single lady, and the family I lived with actually was very politically connected, and we wanted, of course, my sister to stay here and not have to go live with my dad. So we went to court and asked, for us to have custody, but we had her move in with us because it looked more stable for her to be with a family. And so the judge helped that we knew the judge, but anyways, she ruled that she could stay with us. And so this lady, I mean, just amazing, my friend's mom, took, 2 teenagers in, and you can imagine, we were two of us. Well, I was 17 and my sister was only 14. So, to take in, 2 additional teenage and to raise three teenage girls was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, she didn't have too many years to have to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But those are the days where,
tough days.
Yeah.
But so, how did you know that God was taking care of you? I mean, had you been to church at all? Was there a background of faith somewhere along there?
So that's, the beautiful thing is my mom, my mom, had us believe in God and know that, he answers prayers. And, my first big prayer was that my parents were going to get a divorce, and they got divorced. I always just, I just always relied on God. I just am so grateful for her to have given me my faith. And we were Catholic, but I'd say Catholic light, I never went to confirmation or, any of that. And we would attend, church on Sundays, hit and miss. But it was just really just the belief of knowing that God was with us. And then when we ask, we will receive. Right. And just that faith is what she gave us. And so it was truly the greatest gift that I have today.
Somewhere along the road then, did you begin to interact with others of faith?
Yeah, so when I married, my husband and his family were Christian Scientists. And so, pretty much our whole community was, Christian Scientists. And we were married for 23 years, and then my husband wanted a divorce. And then I, sought out, I wanted something a little different. So then I went to Unity Church, and then I found my way to Sagebrush, and it was just a really neat thing. I was living in Ridgecrest at that time, and Sagebrush had a church in the International District. And so what was really neat about going there is that you got to go to church and you got to serve at the same time, with a community that really needs it. And, somebody that introduced me to it just said, you'll see in this congregation so many people have been saved, and the love for the Lord, it radiates, and it does. It was just the neatest experience. So I was single for 7 years. And I meet my husband, and he's the most amazing Christian believer. He's actually a volunteer pastor at our church. And I just think it's, again, so neat that, 7 is complete in the Bible. Right. And 7 years is a long time to be single, but I was choosy, and he was, my husband was waiting for me. Yeah. And so now I'm just married to the most amazing Christian man, and he's a volunteer pastor at the church. We lead a small group. So faith has always been there, but it's just nice to have a soulmate to be able to go through life together with. Especially when it's your second marriage. Right. Second marriage statistics are not good. I think the failure rate is something like 85%.
Well, but you did it God's way. You let him choose.
Yes.
You waited. You didn't go out looking. Yes. You waited.
Yeah. Well, and I dated, but it just wasn't right. And so now, my husband and I, each year we do some kind of a Christian, marriage encounter every year, so that again, I say we play offense instead of defense, to make sure that our marriage thrives.
Yeah,
and that we're an example of what a beautiful second marriage can look like.
So tell me, did you have children along the way?
Yes, so I have 2 children.
Okay.
And
that was from your first marriage?
That's from my first marriage, yes. And so, yeah, my oldest is in Steamboat in Colorado and is an engineer and does well. And my youngest lives here. He's also an engineer. So, yeah, just couldn't be prouder of them. And my husband has 2 kids, and, one of them has our 3 grandkids in Colorado. And they're just a beautiful Christian family, and it's just fun to see them thrive.
It's awesome to see the path that we're allowed to go down sometimes, because, Christian Science and unity, and, and then you come into the realness.
Exactly.
It's like you think it's real at the time, because I did the same thing. So it's like you think it's real, and sometimes it's just an interim step that the Lord is using, I think, to get us to exactly where He wants us to be.
I agree.
And so now tell us a little bit about, you're a realtor, right?
I'm a mortgage loan officer.
Mortgage loan officer, that's
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did that come about years ago? Have you been doing it for many, many years?
So I'll back it all the way up, because, again, I was raised in apartments.
Yeah.
And I dreamed of living in a house. It was, apartments are very transient.
Yeah.
You don't establish roots. Your people that are your neighbors are going to live there for a few months and move out. So another item I used to pray about all the time is that I could live in a house.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough at 22 years old that I bought my first house. My sister and I, moved in together, and we bought our first house. And then I never looked back. So I was working with my husband at the time in his insurance agency, and somebody just, came and said, you should be doing mortgages. That's what people are doing. They're putting mortgages inside insurance agencies. And so I said, okay. And what's neat is how God talks to you along the way. So I had started with this one lady learning mortgages, and then in a 2-week period, 3 people had asked me, do I know this lady? Okay, that she had her own mortgage company. And none of them were related, and just one name coming at you in 2 weeks, So I call this lady up and I say, you know what? It's this, 3 people have asked me if I know you, can I meet with you? So I met with her, and next thing you know, I'm working with her, because God guided me right there. And so we worked together for a few years. She taught me the business. But what I love about what I do is, because I do want to take people that are, renting right now and putting them into a house. It's such a different experience, especially when you have a family, that you grow those roots, that you have those neighbors, that you have that backyard. It's just a whole different way of living. And, I'm very passionate about the real estate. I've also used it as an avenue for retirement, and I own some rentals. And I love helping other people use real estate as an avenue, to gain wealth.
Yeah. So, you're helping people with their American dream.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we're going to go for a short message here. And I just want to encourage you as you're listening today. Here you've heard for someone coming from a shattered childhood, and yet God put His faith in her at that young age to stand. That doesn't happen with everyone. A lot of people really get pushed down from it. But, God has a plan for your life. He will see it through if you will say yes. And there's a number on the bottom of the screen. It's the number for our prayer partners. Please call us if you need prayer. You're not alone out there. God loves you, and He wants the very best for you. He's got a plan and a purpose for your life today, too. So call us. We'll be right back after this. Christine, we were talking about the American dream. I think everybody longs to have their own little plot of land you know, with their own home that they own. And there's a security to that.
Yes.
And especially when you have a family.
I agree. You know, especially, I mean, renting is, and, you know, in any time, but you know, you don't know who your neighbors are going to be. You don't know if the landlord's going to raise your rent. You know, you don't know if the landlord's going to decide to sell the house. You have no stability there. You know, and so it's nice when you're in your own house and you have that stability, and you can make it your home. You can paint the walls any color you want. You get to make it your true home.
Yeah, and you get to know your neighbors. I mean, there's you develop a kinship within your neighborhood. You know, to me, I look at what's going on right now with all these apartments going up. I don't know about in Albuquerque, but up in Santa Fe, they're like gray and darker gray, and they look like gulags to me. I mean, and they're just everywhere, and I'm thinking, who's inhabiting these places?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, to me, it's depressing. And you know, and I mean, I lived in apartments, but I've also had homes.
Yeah.
And now acreage, you know, which is even better.
Exactly. Exactly.
But so, I mean, how can you help people?
So I think one of the greatest things is, you know, as people, if their people are a first-time buyer, there is an amazing first-time buyer program that we have in the state of New Mexico. I think it's, you know, probably the best in the nation. So what happens is the program offers $10,000, 0% interest. It is repayable to use for their down payment.
Yeah.
And then there's a second mortgage that they can use for closing costs. So somebody can truly get into a house without any money at the closing table. Now they're going to need a little bit of money for earnest money, $500, $1,000. You know, we do collect for the appraisal and the inspections. Those can be put on a credit card. But it's very inexpensive to get into a house. You don't have to have all this money saved, and I think that's a big misconception. Also, the interest rate on that program is usually at least a full point cheaper. You know, we're in the 6s on that one.
Wow.
So it's just a beautiful, it has income limits, but most of the time, you know, people fit into those income limits, and it's just a beautiful program. So that's probably the number one program that we have to help people with home ownership.
Do you have any stories of maybe somebody that was so anxious to get a home and finally got into it?
Yeah, I have a lady whose husband was a truck driver, and they lived in a mobile home park. And I probably will tear up a little bit because I'm not kidding you. When I would talk to her on the phone, I mean, I could hear, I'm not kidding you, bullets. You know, they were living in the International District, and you could hear gunshots and all that. And she's just like, Christine, get me out of here. And so we did, you know, we put her in that program, and we're still friends to this day. She texted me just a couple days ago to say thank you again. You know, she's just so appreciative. But, you know, they were just an amazing family. She made it a point to make sure that they were in good schools, and they were going to change, you know, that generation was going to be different than maybe what they experienced before. And home ownership was a big part of that. And, you know, they realize that now they've got everybody that they work with, you know, looking to do the same.
You know, think about how many, especially during COVID, so many people that were on the streets are living out of their cars so that their kids could still go to school in the district. Are you seeing some of that beginning to change now?
You know, I don't, you know, I don't really come across the people that are true homeless for the, you know.
But they've had homes.
Yes, and they've lost them, yes. You know, but yeah, I don't really see a lot of people in that situation. But yeah, and the nice thing is, again, there's lots of resources, you know, there's Section 8 housing, there's, you know, there's a lot of alternatives for people.
Right. Because I mean, you know, I remember as I was getting out of college and we lived in an apartment, and the desire, you know, let's have something we can make our own.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of people out there, and a lot of them have been living in apartments for many, many years.
Yes.
but there's still that heart desire, especially when you have children. It's
Yes.
hard to branch out, in an apartment with all their toys and
Yeah, and pets,
Yeah,
that's another thing,
yeah, exactly.
Pets is a
Things-
whole different thing, and no backyard or any of that. It's
Right,
just, it's a
yeah.
whole different way of living.
So tell us a little bit about where you are, now today. You said you and your husband have a home group, and so how many people usually show up for that?
Well, and we actually do it at the churches. It's a
okay.
small group, but we do it at the church just because it's a convenient location. So we have probably on a consistent basis, at probably 12 to 15. Now we had gotten so big that we were like standing room only one time or a few times at 30 people. Well, then they had us break it up because it just isn't as intimate. So we've had, luckily we grew it so big that we, had to break it up. But we have about 12 to 15 people.
Oh, okay.
And we've been together for quite some years, and they're a beautiful set of people. We were together at Sagebrush Highland. Most everyone there has just a servant heart, and we just learn from each other and grow. And we're family.
Yeah.
We go through everything together, and we're there to help each other
As
out.
churches grow and they get larger and larger, these groups are so important.
Exactly.
Because people can get lost.
Yeah.
But when you've got those groups and you can let your hair down,
Exactly.
you can share, and you're bearing each other's burdens.
Yes.
But you're also encouraging one another. It becomes a family.
That's exactly it. Yeah, we're family.
Yeah.
And it's just neat to see what we've all been through together. There's a lady whose daughter was a drug addict out on the streets for 10 years, and she had just given her to the Lord. She had done everything, and that she ends up getting hit by a car, and she almost died. But it's what it took to turn her life around, and now she's this amazing Christian, and it's just so fun to have been through that whole journey with her.
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it really increases your faith.
Definitely.
And it builds it up. So, from the time that you started Sagebrush and you met your husband and all of that, your faith has really expanded, hasn't it?
And I say, this is my probably final chapter. I'm 62, but my husband and I are just so grateful. We drive up to our house. Again, I grew up in apartments. His dad was a police officer. They grew up in a 900 square foot house.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 bedroom, 1 bath. We drive up to our house. We live in Sandia Heights, and we know that God has blessed us with this.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful that that my last chapter, is my best chapter.
Right.
And that's why I feel like my life is really parallel to Job's. I always had faith where there are moments, yes, there were moments, but I always knew He was with me and that I was going to be blessed. And this is my, season of blessing. I have an amazing husband. I have amazing kids. I have my sister and her family are just the best Christians. And, my sister and I are both very fortunate that we didn't succumb to our childhood, because a lot of people, unfortunately, follow in the footsteps of their parents, become alcoholics, become abusive, all that. And we don't have any of that in our family.
Though He slay me, still I will praise Him. Yeah. Amen. Thank you so much for coming and sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I just pray that for those of you watching today, maybe some of this is it's really relating to you, and it's stirring something up inside of you. And if that's you, we've got prayer partners that love to pray. And it's their honor and privilege to be able to pray with you. The number's right there on the bottom of the screen. Please call. And don't wait. Don't let the enemy start trying to whisper in your ear, oh, they don't really care, or it doesn't matter. Yes, it does. It matters, and we do care. And God loves you, and He wants a way for you to be able to move forward, because He's got a plan and a purpose for your life, just like He did for Christine. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you. May he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his everlasting peace. Shalom, shalom.
Thank you for joining us today on God Answers Prayer. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on our program, please contact us by visiting kchftv.org and click on Share Your Testimony. Our prayer partners are here to pray for your needs. Call us today at 505-345-4165. We appreciate your prayers and support. Join us again next time for more inspiring stories and testimonies. Remember, God is always listening, and He answers our prayers in His perfect timing.